spinning. Oh, there we go. Glory to Jesus Christ, glory forever. Hello, everybody. Let's talk vocations. This is Father Anthony Perkins. I'm here in Hartwell, Georgia, and I have a guest with me today, and I'm so excited. I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time, but COVID and all kinds of stuff, life happens, right? So I've got Dr. Sarah Riccardi-Swartz with me, PhD, and she is a Postdoctoral Fellow at Arizona State University working with the Recovering Truth, Religion, Journalism, and Democracy in a Post-Truth Era program. And she recently received her PhD from New York University in anthropology. And just a lot of life changes for her. And I'm so excited to have her on. We're going to talk about truth and religion and how Orthodoxy is doing as part of that conversation. And, well, we should be part of the reconciliation and healing. So, Sarah, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on, Father. I'm so excited to talk with you today.
It's a great blessing. We have mutual friends, but we've never actually met. You weren't
I
in
know.
You weren't in Romania, were you? At the
No, I skipped that one.
Okay, yeah, you're allowed.
Thank you.
We were talking in the green room about how this COVID has really changed all the academic cycle, right? So, you were used to seeing people and hanging out with people and getting caught up at conferences, right? That's
Yeah.
what we do. And even though conferences are online, it's not the same. You can get maybe the information, but you don't get that contact.
It's definitely not the same. We sort of sit there in these little boxes and look at each other and then you never know the sort of etiquette for talking to one another. Should you wave the little hand or comment in chat that you have a question? It's very awkward.
Oh, it's so true. It's so true. And, and teaching and being a student is also, it's just bizarre. It's not bizarre, it's just so different. And like right now, I've got 3 kids at home and they're in school too, one on the other side of the computer and one over here to my left and one upstairs. And so I may lose you because,
Okay.
if
You are a bit fuzzy right now as you're streaming into me, so
that's why. Because
I'll try to carry it if I lose you.
right. Oh, excellent. So I love your topic, and it's so timely, talking about truth, because I'm studying political science, and one of the things that we study is how increasingly polarized we are, right? And there are psychological reasons, and tribalism and all that plays into it, but it's just nasty, and and some of the fringes on each side are also getting more vocal, and it seems to me more dangerous. And it's not just here; it's in Europe as well. So, what's going on here? What happened to truth?
It's very interesting to me because there was an article back, I think it was 2016, 2017, in Time magazine, is truth dead? Right? Are we living in sort of the post-truth era? And it was a nod to Is God Dead? The really very well-known Time magazine cover in 1967. And that's the question that we're sort of grappling with in this project that I'm part of, that I'm just really honored to be part of. We're trying to think together as a team of scholars and journalists and civic leaders. What does it mean to live in a post-truth era? How can we recover truth? If truth is dead or gone, where did it go? And what are the reasons that it's died? And one of the things that keeps coming up in our fellow seminars is the sort of fracturing of civil friendship and civic discourse in the way that we talk to each other. And so we've seen that play out not only in our personal lives and conversations around the dinner table that we have about politics and religion. It can be very fraught. We know that. But we also see it on the national stage, right? We see it in debates that happen where they become very, very vocal and not civil at all. And these are, professionals who are on stage debating each other. And actually, I was thinking about this because the other morning I turned on C-SPAN 3 because I'm a total nerd and I love C-SPAN, all of the different C-SPANs. And there was the debate between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, and it was so civil. And you could see that they completely, at least verbally and the way they stood and sort of looked at each other, that they completely disagreed on most things they were talking about. And yet the civility and the way in which they interacted with each other was something that we're not seeing now playing out in this election cycle. So, perhaps our contribution to this conversation in this project will be to think about the ways in which we can bring back sort of civic friendship and that interest in dialoguing that doesn't just dismiss people or want one opinion over the other.
Right. Yeah. This listening, and you'd think as Christians, right? This is our role in it, and so we can talk about the politics, but really, I'm more interested in that angle. We're supposed to love, even to love our enemies, right? And we don't get a pass on that. Loving requires listening, right? It requires knowing, and we're just not up for it. We don't even, if you have someone who's living in the left silo of information and someone who's living in the right silo of information, it's hard for them to know each other. They'll use common words, President Trump, but the meaning surrounding them and the data surrounding them, is just completely different. It's like a different dimension,
Yes.
So and what I've been trying to do, in my small role, I have a couple of small parishes that I take care of, and my podcasts and stuff is saying, no, stop. As Christians, we have to be above that. We have to model, like you said, civility, right? And most especially model understanding, model compassion. So even if you disagree with President Trump or Black Lives Matter or Antifa, right? Understand them as they understand themselves, not as your silo, interprets them and their motivations, right? And so, and I love coming at it through the angle of truth. Recently, I read a couple of books on this. One was by Samuel Harris, and I think it was just called Lies or Lying. And he's the I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a neuroscientist, I think.
Yeah.
He's also, a psychologist and philosopher, and just a very clear thinker. And he says, look, he turns telling the truth into a categorical imperative. He says, it's going to cause some discomfort, but the loss of it is too great, and it's too easy for us to slide, right?
Right.
And then the other one is Rod Dreher just came out with another book called Live Not by Lies. And so Sam Harris is on the left, and Rod Dreher's on the right, and they're both kind of diagnosing this. And of course, Dreher's prognosis is very different, right?
Sure.
But he's using, the thing that I really love about that book is he's using the dissidents from communism and Eastern Europe as a witness of how you can live in a culture that does not respect lies. That doesn't respect truth, and where there is no civility. How can you be a witness there? And I think those are both good, but where we live, and you're an anthropologist, right? So I really want to stop talking and listen to you, right? You are trained and experienced in just that kind of active listening, in understanding where people are. When you watch religious people, do you see any difference between them or us, right, and everybody else, or are we worldly? Have we just fallen into this trap?
I think it depends on who we're talking about, right, in terms of religiosity. And I think that one of the things I've noticed is that particular subsects of religious groups often fall into these, what I would consider different realities. So you talked about siloing is a great right way to think about it. We're siloed in left and right, but we're also sort of, it's not just silos, it's almost dimensional, right? So if I'm living, say I'm a Christian, right, and I'm living in New York City, and I go to church, and I have a life, and I work, and I have a job, and I'm just very active, and I'm politically active. That's a far different reality, a lived experience, than someone who perhaps lives in a very rural community and, stays at home and goes to church every day versus, once a week. That understanding of reality is not only shaped by one's socioeconomic status, by one's geographical location, but also the way in which they engage faith and the way in which they practice it. And so one of the things that and it's, as an anthropologist, it's just as much a struggle for me as I think it is for anybody else to engage in dialogue sometimes. But I think that active listening is really key, that witnessing something, that acknowledging that this exists in the world and maybe we don't agree with it, but it's okay.
Yeah, slow to respond. I'm taking notes. Yeah, witnessing something. Yeah, I'm seeing something. I'm part of something. Yeah, and I had a wonderful conversation with a friend of mine, Gregory Jensen. He's a PhD in psychology and spiritual development. And we were talking about how hard it is for some people to just accept complexity, right? And this is, it's just one of those personality tendencies, right? And so you can reduce that cognitive load by, either oring, black and whiting. Mm-hmm. And it's so easy for people to fall into that because, as you say, if you are going to be civil to somebody you don't agree with, you have to be able to accept messy, right? Mm-hmm. If you're going to listen to somebody and actually understand their motivations and not just that, value their motivations because they're human, mm-hmm. right?
Right.
Then that's complexity, and you have to be able to keep that avatar of them in your mind and your heart and your attitude towards them with love, while you're also maintaining a different opinion, right? And love for yourself, right? And maybe it's too much to expect of people.
It's really hard, right? Isn't that the true challenge of Christianity, though? To love one another, which seems so simple on, that simple little phrase, love one another, right? The hardest thing in the world to do.
Yeah. And maybe that's what we're going through this, because in America, we've had it so easy. I mean, let's face it, we figured out a way to get people as many Doritos and as much entertainment as they could want, right? And we had this idea, I love everybody, right? And then now, because of the way, media covers our divisions, the divisions are increasing. And now the preacher comes and says, oh yeah, do you love President Trump and his supporters? Do you love Black Lives Matter and Antifa and their supporters, right? And all of a sudden people are like, oh my, no. And our first reaction is justification. Say, yeah, but, mm-hmm. And then when you say, well, no, let's try hard. And I've done this, because of my position. I have liberals and conservatives that I try to pastor. So if someone has a hard time, like when President Trump got COVID, right? For serious Christians, that was, of the left, that was a difficult thing. Mm-hmm. How, like, yeah, but you've got to pray for his health, right? But. And then the Black Lives Matter and the Antifa, the way it's been covered, is to highlight division and to increase people's antipathy if they're on the right. And, mm-hmm. So it's the same conversation. And you get that, yeah, but. And no, yeah, but is not part of active listening. Yeah, but is part of, I'm going to make sure you understand that you're wrong and I'm right.
Yeah, it's taking those universal truths of listening and loving and using them as a front for your own opinion. That yeah, but statement. Yeah.
Yes, that's
and I really saw that when in the Orthodox world, when Archbishop Alpidophoros was marching in Brooklyn with the Black Lives Matter movement. The hate and the fangs really came out online. At first, it was very interesting because it would say, "Well, I agree that Black Lives Matter, but," right, and then it sort of devolved from there until it was, at least on Twitter and other social platforms, really hateful. When it was something that clearly he felt very strongly about as a Christian, that he felt like this was an important statement to make. And it wasn't shocking to me that the fangs sort of came out. But I think it highlights sort of the divisions that are already there, at least in Orthodoxy. And this summer, the COVID pandemic, all of these have really brought to the fore the social issues that Orthodox Christians are grappling with, and have offered us a view into that really big divide.
Yeah, and it's been just a series of things. So I'm a Ukrainian Orthodox priest, right? I'm American born, I'm a convert, but that's the label, Ukrainian Orthodox, because I serve in the USC of the USA. And as you know, for the past few years, Ukrainian Orthodoxy has been one of those words like Trump or Black Lives Matter, where it's just incredibly divisive, right? And so now, within the Orthodox world, instead of using terms like Trump or Black Lives Matter, all you have to do is say, what is your attitude towards the ecumenical patriarch, right? Or Archbishop Alpidophoros, as you said. What is your attitude towards the Patriarch of Moscow, right? And right, and in order to simplify that cognitive load, people just demonize one or the other, right? Rather than saying, "Hey, Ukraine, complicated situation.
Yeah.
No real good solution, and not doing anything wasn't a real good solution either." So, but people were not willing to live in that complexity, right? Because in that complexity, there's things like forgiveness, there's things like patience, tolerance, and this love for someone and charity towards their intentions, and that's a hard space to occupy, and we're not willing to do it. And here's an irony. So, I don't know if this is tribalism or self-selection or what, but if I can guess with a high degree of certainty what someone's attitude is towards the ecumenical patriarch based on who their bishop is, that's not it's not a decision that someone made. It's a tribal reaction. Unless it's the case that somehow people self-selected into ROCOR, OCA, Antiochian, and so on. There's something different going on. Every single one of them will say, "No, my attitude towards the ecumenical patriarch, towards Ukraine, towards Russia, is based on this moral mathematics."
Right.
No, that's not the work that's going on. If I can predict your opinion based on where you sit, there's something else going on.
I mean, it's really, you call it tribalism. I perhaps would call it partitioning, right? It's this sort of way in which we build our social structure around us. And certainly, I work with self-selectors, I work with converts, right? So I see that partitioning building in action, right? On an individual level and on a sort of corporate level as well. But I agree with you. It is true that you can almost predict where people are going to fall in terms of the party line based on the hierarchical system they fall under. And perhaps, I don't know, some anthropologists would say that the entire problem is hierarchy, right? To begin with, because then that takes away sort of the self-will of the person if they're just saying yes to someone above them, right? I don't know. that's a whole nother conversation for another day.
Right. Yeah. And maybe one of your future students can go do some anthropological research to kind of suss that one out. But yeah, I mean, I see it, in my own work, because in Asheville, we've got a Greek parish, the Asheville area. We've got a Greek parish, right? And we've got a Rocor parish, which a long time ago, one of the big names in Orthodoxy is Father Joseph Honeycutt. And he was the priest of that. He took them into Rocor. And then he repented and went, because that was back when Rocor was not seen as canonical. He went back to the Antiochians and has we're all blessed by his witness. But it's, when they were formed, we are not that, right? So you do get self-selection into these things. And now we've set up a mission in Waynesville, which is about 45 minutes away, which is intentionally, active listening. That's, how to live with complexity, right? How to love the other, right? So, there is going to be some self-selection in a place like that where there is an active marketplace. But it's tragic. It was actually good when we were, during that brief time when we were in communion, 10 years or something, 15 years, when we were all in communion with one another. So, it was very positive, and, learning about building friendships that had been, like you said, partitioned, where we had been partitioned away from each other, and Rocor priests and parishioners, and Greek priests and parishioners, and Ukrainian priests and parishioners, all learning about each other and valuing one another. And then now, some of those friendships endure, but then you throw in COVID, where the only interaction period is online, so there's no face-to-face, that kind of human reaction of charity when you're actually in a room with someone. All there is the other person as an idea. And, anybody can write me off as an idea, right? And I can write anybody else off as an idea. It's just, I'll be honest with you, Sarah, it's heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking.
It is. And, one of the things we've been thinking about in our project is, what does media mean for truth? The relationship of truth, not only to democracy, but to sort of the civic life, especially now that everything is online. How do we foster these discourses of friendship that could potentially happen in real life that now in the digital world are basically non-existent, or we've again siloed, as you pointed out. So it's going to take a lot of work to think about where we're going in terms of truth and what happens after the post-truth era.
Yeah, one of the neat things, it's me speaking as a social scientist, right? One of the things that increases variation on this model is the kind of outside actors, right? So you've got, a long time ago, the Russian government and the Russian church made an investment in outreach, right? Mm-hmm. So the church and the foreign policy department of the government, they said, let's work together as closely as we can. They developed Russia Today. They've got all these outlets to try and influence, and they should. That's what governments do, right? Yeah. But within this climate, because the Russian government is more, I don't know what to call them, populist, more conservative in some ways at least, but certainly more populist. There's an interesting attraction, right? And so I'm a retired intelligence officer, right? And when I used to tell people that, like, it would give me instant credibility with conservatives, right? They would say, okay, this is a guy, that I can listen to. And being a political scientist, that gives me credibility with liberals. So, there used to be at least some kind of a bridge that I could use to talk to people. But now, if it's someone who has partitioned themselves within that kind of, it's not just a Russian media sphere, but it's certainly, you know, Russian influenced, and there's a love of that culture there. There's no connection with that. There's with some of them, there's actually, you know, this their patriotism runs a different way now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's not a patriotism that says I want my kids to join the service, right, to be in the army or, you know, some kind of public service. Instead, it's a no. My patriotism leads me to, you know, oppose deep state or whatever it is, right, on the conservative side. It's very strange, right?
It's fascinating. From, you know, most of my research, I consider myself an anthropologist of religion, politics, and media, and the media part, I think, is by far the most important right now, because we see media as spaces in which people are renegotiating not only their religious ideas, but also their political ideas. And given the sort of fake news and the deep fakes, the QAnon, right, that's happening right now, that is particularly scary, because people are, first of all, let me take a step back and say that there's a big anti-intellectualism trend in the United States, which then leads people to go online and find out things for themselves, right? They don't want someone to tell them facts. They want to find it out for themselves. And the problem lies in the idea that for them, facts and truth are often the same thing. And the facts that they're gathering are often fake facts, right? We know that, especially with the rise of QAnon, these facts are totally bogus, and yet people are believing them and saying that this is factual, this is true. And so it's not, of course, Russia is a major problem in terms of propaganda through its outlets, its media outlets, but it's also American actors and European far-right actors that have these spaces in media that are just breeding grounds for ideological thought and sometimes action. Yeah,
so this populism, right? This know-nothings, you know, this comes up in American culture every once in a while. And
yeah,
it's difficult because the role of expertise is important, right? And when we discredit them, when you got people who look at the CDC in the current crisis and the WHO and say, no, I can't trust them because they got this, that, and the other wrong. And in their partition, that's all that's been focused on is, you know, the CDC, I think they said don't use masks early on, and it was because they wanted to make sure that the people who really needed masks got them and stuff. But anyways, people, like you say, they take facts for truth, and the facts are cherry-picked, whether intentionally or through confirmation bias, right?
Right.
In a way that just reinforces the underlying attitude. And if we lived in a more complicated world, those truths underlying the facts would constantly be in conversation. Mm-hmm. But that conversation really isn't happening. It's
right.
not going on. So
right.
With media, just to make sure people understand, we're not just talking about things like CNN, Fox News, Russia Today, and stuff like that. It's what's carrying the communications.
Right. Absolutely. So it's not just the 24-hour news cycles. Since the sort of democratization of media with social media, you have the average everyday person basically being a carrier of information. So I don't know, I can't remember the latest statistics on how many Americans gather their news from Facebook. And it's very obvious if you're on Facebook a lot, which I am because of my research, how people will constantly share news, right? So and most people are not clicking through. If we look at the research from experts on media, they're not clicking through, right? They're reading the headlines in their feed and they're scrolling through as fast as possible. And so one of the problems, the democratization of media is excellent, right? Because it brings to the fore issues such as the murder of George Floyd, right? Because we have sort of citizen bystanders who were willing to film that and put that up, right? We have all of these important documentations from citizens on the ground. But with that also comes, right, the problems with the democratization of media, which come when you have this influx of ideas that are labeled as correct or truth, that are not, right? And that just keeps reinforcing those biases and that siloing, right? So if, for example, if somebody's reading that, the hashtag Wayfair scandal, right? The child trafficking scandal is correct, and they're posting about it on their social media, and their friends see it, and they keep posting and reposting and reposting. That becomes embedded into the social discourse that they're having with their friends and families and then their social networks. And that increases disinformation and misinformation among these people, among these particular populations. So, it's definitely not just 24-hour news cycles. It's the everyday person engaging in practices of social media and media-related practices in general.
Yeah, and optimists, the techno people that I like, the ones that aren't just doom and gloom, right? We're reprogramming our minds and our societies for hell, right? Come on, I think we're more resilient than that, right? They point out that this is all new. And in the past, when a new technology comes, we figure out how to adapt it and how to regulate it, right? And so you're seeing that right now, and it's uneven, and it's not all that effective. So you just had, the controversy about Hunter Biden, right? And whether the stuff that was stolen, it was not obtained in a good way, and it was reported by the New York Post, right? Should that be out there? And, and so conservatives are like, yeah, it should be out there. Of course it could. They took stuff from, that was obtained in the same way against President Trump, and they didn't censor that. And you're like, oh, yeah. It just gives me a headache, right?
Well, and it's the sort of ethics of media. We've yet to really, really figure out a good ethics of media. And so then you have, the sort of Luddite movement that wants to eschew all technologically driven media forms, because of course there's analog media as well, if we think about newspapers, print materials. But I among my own friends, I have people that say I have to get off of social media. I have to, disentangle myself, unhook from the network, right? They use all these sort of like AI terms and sort of what my mother would call sci-fi. And but I don't think that helps, right? Because it's already such a part of our everyday lives, and we're so reliant on it, right? We don't have. I thought about this week because my mother said to me, I need a phone book. And I said, well, I don't think they make those anymore. You're going to have to Google it. So there, separating ourselves, right, is not always the option. I think one of the options is thinking about what we're disseminating online, really thinking about it before we click that share button, how that affects not only us, but those around us, because that's love, right? We're not going to share something unless we think it's valuable to others around us and important. And so we have to think about the motivation, right? If the motivation is just to get likes or anger people because we see something about Trump again, right? Like, that's not probably beneficial in the larger scheme of things, right?
Yeah, and there's no. It's so tough I take regular breaks from Facebook. So I have an app on my computer that I'm not allowed on it right now. So I submarine down, right? And I'm an introvert, so it's kind of nice. And then I come up and I say, okay, everybody's all right. Yeah, they're still crazy, and go back down, right? Because I've kind of figured out where my value added is in this conversation. And there's no like in regular conversation, if you've got the person who's just spouting nonsense, there are ways that we've developed over our millions of years, of kind of shunning, right? And the look, that's right, without having to argue, because arguing with crazy is just crazy, right? But on Facebook, there isn't, right? And especially for certain personalities like mine, it really does bother me when people are being mean, right? So for me, it's not, oh no, someone's wrong on the internet. It's, oh my goodness, that person just willfully misinterpreted what another person said just so they could demonize them, right? I'm like, oh golly. And early on when I was younger, had more energy, I would point these things out, and it was always so well appreciated. And I got no, it was never appreciated. It never worked. So,
right, it doesn't work. Yeah, I've seen this time and time again on socials, and I recently saw a Twitter argument that I got in the middle of, right, defending someone, and then I just blocked somebody. I thought, well, that's not the way to dialogue. But at the end of the day, it was either that or just feel this sense of anxiety all day. And I decided to block somebody. And I rarely do that because I don't feel like that's beneficial, right? That's not dialoguing. But it was just so hateful that I as a person, like emotionally, was like, I think I've had enough. I had to weigh it at some point and say, no, that's enough for me. It's unhealthy to continue this. But, that one moment, though, really prompted me for the next few days to think about, like, what does that mean? What would that look like in real life? If we weren't, online, if we were having a conversation, what would that look like? Would that look like me walking out the door? Would that look like me putting up my hand and saying, no, stop? So it's fascinating how our ways of communication have changed. Our ways of social communication have changed through new media technologies.
Yeah, right. And we will develop, ways of responding to these that are sustainable. We just will. I mean, we're human beings. But right now, and for some personalities where, they've got whatever you want to call it, thick skin or something like that, it's not even an issue, and they just look at somebody like me and they're like, you wuss, right? Just get out there and be yourself, right? I'm like, nah, you don't get it. They're like, you're a coward. I'm like, maybe, but maybe the things that are part of my constitution that were useful, in society 100 years ago aren't so useful now, and I've got to figure out how to work with it. But this idea of what does it mean when you cut somebody off, right? When you unfollow them or whatever. And I automatically, like you, I say, what would that be if I were in a conversation in a hallway or something, or in a faculty meeting? But here's the difference. The difference is that there are thousands of people in that faculty meeting. Thousands of them, right?
Yeah.
And so, the ability to actually listen and know is so hard. It's exhausting in real life. I don't even know if it's possible on Twitter or Facebook. I'm not there. I'm not there yet.
Yeah. I think it's going to take us collectively as a global community of people. And of course we have to recognize that not all populations still even have access to the internet. So those of us that do are certainly in a privileged position, but with that privilege comes an enormous responsibility for caring for each other in really charitable ways when we're interacting. And that's really the most difficult part of it.
It is, but we've got to do it because
I know.
We've only got like maybe 10 more minutes. So let's try to see if we can figure out some ways. So we've diagnosed part of the problem, and it is really difficult because the tendency to partition or silo and the tribalism and stuff. This is a strong tendency, and right now it's encouraged by the way that social media and media that feeds it are set up. They're set up to polarize. And social media can be a narcissistic media, so there's very little, it's not set up for sympathy in the way that face-to-face and, interactions are. And so, I can see many reasons why this is going to get worse, right? But, we are Christians. We don't live in that world. We live in the world where God is with us, right? So there's things like grace. There's, the Holy Spirit moving. Things can change, and things can change quickly, and things can change well. Yeah. So how can we witness this? Both, you were using the word witness, I think, as a way of not just active listening, but seeing someone, knowing someone and respecting that. And then there's also the active, witness is an active verb. How can I be out there as an example of something that can bring healing? How can that work with social media? If you have any advice for that, I'm willing to try, almost anything.
I think one of the things, besides, of course, just holding back and thinking before you speak, which is like, we too often just want to, we have our thumbs at the ready and we're ready to say something. Sometimes just taking a minute even to just think through what you're actually trying to say before you get it out there in the world is incredibly helpful. And, in terms of, this could probably translate online, but in terms of our communications face-to-face, whenever we get back to face-to-face, after this pandemic is over, hopefully it will end at some point. I think if we try to activate the anthropologist within each of us, it would be really beneficial. And what I mean by that is listening, active listening, but also asking questions that don't assume something, right? So one of the questions, I work with communities that are often very homophobic, and I will ask questions that get them to think about the issues, the people rather than the issues, right? So, for example, I'll say, have you ever met a gay person, right? Do you have any members of your family who are gay? What have your interactions been like with a queer individual, right? Those are things that think more about the person rather than the issues that they're trying to focus on, which often start to spiral if we think about the issues rather than the people, right? And asking those open-ended questions of each other allows people to have a conversation that perhaps they didn't intend, and that can be really fruitful, and really help us bridge those gaps that we have in these siloed arenas.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and right now, we don't, because we're not interacting with as many people, right? So we do tend to fall back on the stereotypes of our mind, like the puppet show in our mind, where the people are avatars of ideas rather than living, breathing, people. And it was interesting. So in Rod Dreher's book, people might stereotype him as being, oh, he's that, he's going to be on the right and he's going to be black and white and stuff. It's not. He comes out and he says, look, no, you've got to be engaged with the other, because ideological difference, that's one layer, right? But there's this layer of humanity, right? Mm-hmm. So he was saying, the one example that I remember from the book is that, if you're having a group meeting, it's okay that it's infiltrated. It's okay that, in that case, there are communists in it. But in here, oh my goodness, what if there's a gay person in our group, right? It's not a big deal, because human to human, you're going to learn to respect each other. And the communists might not turn you in, right? Because they see you as a human and not as a betrayer of society or whatever. So along with this idea of being more intentional about what we post, I'm an INFP, so that, I take hours and days for a single post, right? To make sure, how could this be misinterpreted, right? But the flip side of that is to accept that, hey, maybe that other person just didn't think about it. Don't take it as an indicator of their heart or of their attitude towards you. Just Don't take it personal.
It's really good advice. I have to say, I was wondering what your Myers-Briggs was, Father.
Yeah, I'm pretty upfront about it. So yeah, I'm an INFP. Always have been.
I'm an INFJ.
Yeah,
So.
right. Yeah, I would have guessed that. Yeah, and
But it's really true what you're saying. We should just think about what you're posting and think about how it affects people. And it may not everybody may be an INFP, so they may not take days, right, to think over a post and really contemplate what that means. But just taking that moment, even if you're just taking a deep breath and going, okay, what do I actually want to say back to this person? It's so helpful. It's incredibly helpful. But then the other thing we have to think about is if we are seeing something that is hurtful or is in some way slanderous, then we do have to be proactive and take action about that online. And there have been many times when I've seen very, very, very hurtful comments, often not even just hateful, but biased online. And I will, I'll make a note to Facebook about that. And because I think that that's our duty as people who care for each other in this society to watch out for each other. And too often we're bombarded with hate speech online, and that's just not helpful either. So there's a time to wait and think about what you want to say, and sometimes there is also a time to be proactive and say, no, this is an untruth. This isn't right. Yeah. And we need to call it out.
Yeah, and people of goodwill. And this is what I run into. Once you start talking to them, people on the right and the left are concerned about this same issue. Very few people want some kind of a tyranny of lies imposed on people, right? Mm-hmm. And so if we would just, bring back that civility and call people when they're not being civil, right? Mm-hmm. Remind them, no, that's not how humans behave towards one another. You understand that word that you just used, that's not the way that you would talk to your worst enemy. So cut it out, right?
Yeah.
Because bringing back that human level of respect, of love, even for your enemy. If let it begin with us, right, Sarah? Let it begin with us.
That's right. Absolutely.
Well, it's been a real blessing and I didn't get to talk to you about half the stuff I wanted to. So offline or in a future conversation or something, I really want to hear more about your work as an anthropologist of religion, because I love Gertz, and my own work is looking at how people interact with rituals, right? And it's different. So rituals have theological content, but we can't assume that people are receiving the same teaching from it. Like for you, you're a woman, right? Your interaction within the Orthodox tradition, with some of our traditions, have to be different than those of a man. They just have to be. And you're friends with Carrie Frost, so she's talked about those, how as soon as women have a voice, some of the things that crept in, like the rites of purification, just become obviously untenable, right? And you as an anthropologist, that's your radar. That's the thing that you're always noticing. So, oh man, God, we're so blessed to have you, a person of faith, out there studying these things, as rigorously and as a Christian. So God bless you and all your work.
Thank you so much, Father. And thank you for having me on. And I really, so enjoyed our conversation today.
Well, very good. And until next time, you and everybody else, Godspeed.